Buongiorno a tutti. I am Paolo Sironi, your host of the Banker's Bookshelf. Every month, I invite authors and researchers of the most interesting books and studies, which are finding a prominent space in the library of curious bankers and fintech entrepreneurs. And today, we have the privilege to talk to Richard Turrin, author of interesting fintech literature. His first book, Innovation Lab Excellence, draws from his banking experience and his time at IBM when he was leading the cognitive studio in Singapore. His latest bestseller, Cashless, discusses China's digital currency revolution. Cashless is a relevant source to understand how CBDC is being shaped in the Middle Kingdom, where Richard lives, and how much that influences central banks' decisions in the rest of the world. Without further ado, Richard, welcome to the Banker's Bookshelf.
Hello, Paolo, and hello, everyone out there in podcast land. Thank you for listening in. And I will preface this by saying that Paolo and I know each other for many years, so I guarantee a lively discussion.
Hey, Richard, I owe a secret of you, and I don't know, because I don't know whether that's reflected on your LinkedIn profile. I haven't checked. When we met the first time in the 1990s, you were a trader of weather derivatives in New York. Is that correct?
That is correct. Paolo and I first had interaction with one another when we were both working for an Italian bank. And I was bringing weather derivatives to the bank. And yeah, so that was where we first met. And Paolo first looked at me and said, Turrin, you're crazy to do this. And I said, well, maybe a little bit.
Well, Richard, you've been always at the forefront of the craziest innovation things in finance. And maybe CBDCs is one of those as well. And I want to discuss with you, with our audience. First of all, you do live in Shanghai nowadays, don't you?
Yes, I've lived in Shanghai now for 15 years, barring 2.5 years in between where I was in Singapore. But yes, and living in China, what was unique about the experience is that I lived through China going cashless. So when I got to China, we all used cash, and we actually used large bricks of money. And by now, of course, we're all cashless in the sense that we all have WeChat Pay and Alipay, and none of us, and we also I have a CBDC, a digital yuan wallet on my phone, and we've made the transition, at least in all the major first and second tier cities, to a cashless lifestyle where I go out, and if I don't have my phone, I can't pay for anything, but I don't have money or coins in my pocket ever, or cards. Cards are gone here.
Well, you may remember last time I visited China in 2020, I thought I could use my Alipay connected to my European credit card, and that did not work. So I was left without money. I couldn't even get a coffee from the machine in the office, and I relied upon you to be my ATM in a sense.
Well, actually, this is a really funny story because Paolo and I traveled to Hangzhou, the city next door, and I literally had to buy Paolo's train tickets, dinners, and I literally paid for everything. And then he gave me, he had come with a big wad of cash, and he paid me back in 100 RMB banknotes. And the good news is for people who are considering visiting China today, the new system for both Alipay and WeChat Pay for adding a foreign card to it is way better and works very reliably. It's very good now. So, and that was recognized as a necessity by the government because tourists were coming over and having real difficulties as you lived paying for things. So,
yes.
Yeah, so you can use it. You can use Alipay much easier now.
I actually got to learn that was my bank that did not recognize the method while the
well, that I didn't know.
Okay,
so it wasn't Alipay's fault.
Okay, so Richard, you have a privileged observation point because living in China and also being knowledgeable about the rest of the world, you can compare and contrast. And these days, this comparison is so important because there's a source of learning and inspiration everywhere in the world. Nowhere two implementations will be equal, especially when it comes to digital payments. So we really need to understand the idiosyncrasies of all of this. And we might start from China because that's where you are. But first of all, what do you believe are the major trends in the world of payments, whether they are global or more focusing on macro areas?
Sure. So let me say, let me handle, before I answer that question, what are the major trends? Let me just say, China, for some people, some listeners may be saying, well, China isn't relevant. It's too far away. It's too different. And my answer to these people who are thinking that is that no, China is actually a decade ahead of the West in payments, easily. And it's showing you a path to the future. And you're right, Paolo, all the systems won't look to the same. They'll be different. But those trends, China is number one in embedded finance, number one in digital lending, number one in cashless payments. So it's showing this future. So let me answer the question, and it's going to be an easy one, and people will not be surprised by my answer. And the answer is the biggest trend that we have to be watching on a global level is the trend for real-time payments. Now, note, I didn't just say central bank digital currency, or CBDC, which is what people might expect. I love all real-time payment. I happen to think CBDC is the future. I'll leave that for later. But if you have a UPI style system, which is an A to A or account to account style system for UPI, which is the same or similar in nature to Brazil's Pix, which is also A to A, account to account. These are great systems and are fundamentally changing our world. So the expectation for immediate personalized payment is something that is unstoppable. And we are going to get in the West real-time payments similar in nature to what we see with WeChat. We've even heard Elon Musk talk about, hey, X, we need to get the payment side, and he's registering. He's registering in all 50 states in the United States to get X as an authorized payment provider. So this trend for real-time payments isn't going away, and it has huge implications for cards and banks' profits for card-based payments, because banks, frankly, make a lot of money on interchange fees.
Okay. So how does a CBDC differ from using PayPal or Alipay for instant payments?
Sure. The thing that people have to understand most, and I'm talking to, we have a bunch of bankers who are listening in. CBDC does something that only cryptocurrency has done before, and that is to disintermediate the banking system to a degree. Now, I say that I qualify it. So let me explain. Paolo, if I had, when I have, by 2028 or so, when I have a digital euro in my digital euro wallet, and I pay you, or you repay me for buying you dinner in Hangzhou, right? So what'll happen is you will pass digital euro directly from your wallet to my wallet, and there will be no intermediary. There will be no bank standing in between us. And crypto, that's where it came from. It came, and I'm not a particular fan of crypto, but I have to tell people that that's the model. The model is that the digital currency is, in fact, a digital representation of money, and it is proven to be real money by mathematical proofs on the phone or on the transfer system, not through what you have, which now with banking, which is, I know that I'm paying Paolo because I have proof of who I am, proof of identity as the underlying source of account, okay, of proof that you have the account. So, so CBDC is hugely transformative for payments overall. It is an immediate payment form, or will be an immediate payment form when you get a digital euro. But one quick thing: I hedged for large sums. So, Paolo, I want to spend. I need. I'm buying your old Vespa motor scooter, okay, and I'm going to sell it for $5,000. For some, or €5,000. For some larger amounts, yes, the banks are still included in the process. I just want to make people to understand that there's a low-level payments which are completely disintermediated from the bank, and higher-level payments which are intermediated.
Okay, so let's say consumers reward the convenience and easiness of paying and paying safely, but they have no concept of digital money or CBDCs by themselves because
Sure.
it can be a highly technical element. They just care about making sure that they can pay fast and securely. Banks seems to be not much hyper about central bank digital currencies because they fear that chunks of revenues might be, if you like, reduced or eliminated. So why then central banks are considering to develop central bank digital currencies? What motivates them and initiate this trend?
Very, very simple, because even central banks realize that the payment system is phenomenally inefficient. And so I'm going to demonstrate how inefficient it is by showing what the true cost of payments is for both the European Union and for the United States. But I'm going to preface this by saying there are people out there who hear this, that central bank digital currencies are a solution looking for a problem. To which I reply, the problem has been found long ago if you're willing to acknowledge it. And the problem is that the United States pays annually 2.3% of its entire GDP to banks for payment services. And the European Union pays 1.4% of its GDP annually, to banks for payment services. So I ask all fair-minded listeners out there, does the United States or does the EU have something better to do with 2.3% of its GDP or 1.4% of the EU's GDP? Could they spend that on, let me think, social, bridges? Could they spend it on humanitarian assistance to people? There's a lot better ways to spend that money than giving it to banks for payment services. So for those who say CBDCs are a solution looking for a problem, and that includes certain central bankers from the United States, like central banker Waller, who is the biggest Luddite among the Fed secretaries. But the point is, it is tremendously callous to ignore the real cost of payments to society and say that's good enough, because in a digital era, it's not.
So not all central bankers see the same way. What is the main difference between the US, the EU, China, or other relevant central banks in Asia Pacific?
Yeah, and that's a really wonderful question. And the motivations are different. I can lump India and China, for example, together. Both of them are developing nations. Both of them have very large unbanked populations. Both of them see central bank digital currency as a means of financial inclusion. And, so even, I have to refresh the numbers, but even with the tremendous amount of financial inclusion brought by Alipay and WeChat Pay, China still has the largest number of unbanked people on the planet. All right. So it's a big number. I don't remember. It was around 10% of the population, 140 million, roughly. So that's China, that's India. Both of them see the obvious advantage. But now we go to the EU. And one of the things that should stick out in bankers' minds if you're a European banker, is that 60+% of European payments are all handled by American-controlled payment systems, which are predominantly Visa and MasterCard. So there is no European native cash transfer system. So what you see is the ECB repeating over and over again. Very interesting to watch. People seem to it doesn't seem to make the news, but it should. When the ECB says we need our own cash transfer system or digital payment transfer system so that we cannot be shut down. We cannot be sanctioned. We cannot have our payments disrupted. And, this is a fallout of the massive sanctioning events on Russia because of the war and because of sanctions imposed across the planet right now.
Okay, so without taking anybody's side, if I say central banks, credit card companies, and the consumers, can we identify the pros and cons for each of these four actors in the world of payment? So we start again from consumers. So what are the pros and what are the cons?
Very simple. For consumer, you have access to a safe, secure payment means that hopefully will allow you to make cheaper payments because you will be paying vendors. Now, it depends, of course, by country whether this is available, but a vendor could very well decide to discount your payment by a couple of percent, which is equal to their merchant fee for using a card. So you've got basically access to a immediate means of payment that should long-term drive prices down because merchants don't have to always collect the extra money for merchant fees. The payments are disintermediated, meaning that there's no necessary for a bank. I can pay you anytime, 24/7, no problem. And I can do it for free or near free. And of course, the other thing is people will be able to make digital payments offline, with the meaning that they will be able to pay digitally without having a cell phone signal, which
And
is
which are the potential threats that needs to be considered also by regulators to make sure that there's no, different abuse or lack of protection of consumers?
For an offline payment, it turns out, offline payments are offline digital payments using CBDCs are limited. In other words, you're not going to make a very large payment, but if you make a several $100 payment with an offline CBDC, no problem. And the security is actually quite good. So, of course, offline payment, we're worried about what's called double spend of money, where fake banknotes are spent twice. And that's with the new systems, highly unlikely.
Or some consumers are concerned about their privacy.
Okay, so privacy is a very interesting discussion. And I think that there's two issues with privacy. First of all, people don't understand how little privacy you have now. And I will state up front that the digital euro, the digital RMB, and the digital rupee that are in India, and the digital real in Brazil, all of them will have higher degrees of privacy than the credit cards and plastic debit cards that you are currently using. You will have a higher standard of privacy, without question. So first, if you've heard that a central bank digital currency will allow the government to spy on you, I study the design of these. I work with people who work on the designs. Nobody wants to spy on you. And the fundamental design for central bank digital currencies comes out of the crypto space and uses many of the same techniques to ensure a high degree of anonymity, subject, of course, to government's desire to know what you spent. So the government doesn't care if you spend 5, 10, $100, $200 on something. They do care if you start spending $5,000 on something. So that's why you have this privacy threshold for China, and it's under discussion for the digital euro, where everything below a threshold is completely private, and everything above the threshold uses your bank as the intermediary, and there's some documentation left behind.
Okay, so for consumers, we said that the pros, money will move faster and cheaper, which have broader positive consequences also on prices potentially and the way they manage their finances. On the other side, we need to make sure that the technical design is as such that privacy is preserved. What about credit cards or these payment providers, the opportunities and the threats?
Sure. We have a good model for that already in China, where WeChat Pay and Alipay severely disrupted the payment system. But guess what? There are still cards. Okay, cards offer miles, points, cash back, loyalty programs. There's all sorts of things about credit cards, right? So credit cards aren't going to go away immediately. But the reality is that when we launch a digital euro, some amount of payments will eventually migrate to digital euro payments, simply because merchants will have a means of near free means of receiving digital payment. Now, you have to think about your coffee shop. Every time you go in and you tap and pay for your coffee shop, and it's funny because back home in Italy, I know the coffee shop owner where I go all the time. And every time I go in, she complains about Apple Pay and Google Pay, because when people pay with a €2 coin, right, she gets the money. But when you pay with a €2 Google or Apple Pay, she loses probably around 5%, 4% on the price. So it drives her nuts. She's taking a loss. So anyway, there is going to be a reduction in card use. It will not be disastrous, but I would be lying to tell you, if you're a banker and you're listening to this and you run the card division, you should look at what happened to the card usage in China when free payment was available and card use plummeted. Still a lot of cards there, but the usage is way, way down.
Okay, so what you're saying is that the world of payments will be rebalanced. Now there's a great dominance of credit card companies. Most likely their capabilities will be muted, or they will grow less compared to the expectations from the past. What about the banks now? So we say consumers, credit cards, and banks. Banks operate at different levels for the consumers as well as for the corporate clients. The opportunities and the threats for the banking system.
So the good news for the banking system is, of course, that central bank digital currency, first of all, will not destabilize or break the bank. Okay, so there's been a lot of what I would call bank propaganda about how CBDC will destroy the banks, how their capitalization will be undermined. And, you know, the ECB is doing everything in its power, just as the People's Bank of China did, which was to design a central bank digital currency that doesn't break things. No central bank wants to break their banking system. So, number one, central bank digital currency will not destabilize your bank. It will not cause it to fail. The bad thing, and I think we addressed this, I will say briefly, is that yes, payment system revenue, particularly that tied to interchange fees from debit and credit cards, will be reduced, just flat out. On the positive side, we have to look at commercial payments. And we're still working in a SWIFT-based world where commercial payments take days, where commercial payments go through correspondent banks across borders. And we're looking at, even if we're in a domestic world, we look at a world now where CBDC payments are immediate, by the second. and for settlement of securities on securities markets. This is fantastic. So there's a lot of good that will happen for banks because of CBDC on the commercial side of the business that will certainly offset any of the losses from cards on the personal side of the business.
So I find this very interesting. A banker once told me that frictions are good because you can put prices on top of those. And now in this case, you're saying that, yes, the margins will be squeezed because CBDCs will operate at a lower cost compared to the existing payment rails. But at the same time, there's a lot of complexity in existing payment rails, operational risk, and keeping everything in balance will be complex, almost like the system will be reduced in complexity to get to a better state for the banks to manage it all. And then last but not least, the pros and cons for central banks, because they also have to carefully craft the creation of a digital currency in a world where they have to balance their act across regulators, governments, and overall society.
Yeah, there's real, look, central people ask me, well, how come the digital RMB or the digital yuan in China is still in trial phase, and why hasn't it launched yet? Because it's been in trial now for, I guess, 2.5, 3 years. I far enough. When I launched my book is when the trial began. So it was 2021. And the answer is because central bankers are terrified to get it wrong. So there's real risk for them on this. But on the positive side, they see, and I think, and I would give special credit to the European Central Bank for this, and also to the Bank for International Settlements for helping drive a lot of this innovation. They see that eliminating these high margins, eliminating the timing, eliminating the complicated correspondent bank network. They see that there's real advantages to doing that, and that's the financial system of the future. So their risk is they get it wrong and something really goes badly with the central bank digital currency. We certainly know enough about these systems that we run Visa, we run MasterCard, WeChat Pay, Alipay. We run plenty of high volume systems. We run commercial RTGS systems, and retail. So there is a risk that they get something wrong. I think that risk is perfectly acceptable because of their experience running, especially the wholesale RTGS systems that are the norm now for interbank clearing. But beyond that, the benefits to restructuring, innovating, and freeing our overall economies. Ready? I'm going to go back to it from this horrendous weight that we have on our shoulders of GDP scale payments or GDP-sized charges for payments will free society up and allow us to do more with this money. And I think that's fundamentally good for everybody. And I think central banks, by and large, recognize that. And I can't resist it, except for the United States, who thinks that their banking and payment systems are the pinnacle
So basically,
of modern technology, because nobody there has even heard of WeChat Pay or Alipay. They've never seen it, don't know what it is,
they're still using checks. By the way,
Yeah.
what you're saying is that central banks are looking at the complexity of the financial system that grew immensely since capital markets got internationalized in the 1990s. And therefore, the simplification of the way they operate at the lower level might be beneficial in terms of managing for financial stability. At the same time, they need to be very, very cautious the way they design it because they want to create a central point of failure. And that is the reason why there's a lot of discussion, a lot of experimentation going on these days, which takes all central bankers very, very busy to make sure that they do it in the best ways.
Look, absolutely, and we can look right now. Look to the Swiss and French central banks, who are working on wholesale central bank digital currency settlement, and they're using settlement for bond positions. So you're able to send bonds digitally to somebody and get payment versus delivery. So it's really it's remarkable. You want the bond? Here it is. Pay me, bang, paid. It's all within seconds. This is
Richard,
a revolution.
yes, to conclude, in the previous episode, we hosted Brad King presenting the new edition of his 2011 bestseller, Branch Today, Gone Tomorrow. And we ended with a discussion about the fact that though the branch network is contracting and it will contract further in the future, we will not go really branchless. There will be a balance between being totally digital and needing to access services in person. Now we talk cashless here. Do you think the future will be cash low or truly cashless?
Cash low, less cash, not no cash. So look, anybody, well, you can't see it, but if you were to look at the desk behind me in the drawer, there's two wads of cash. One is in US dollars and the other is a wad of cash in RMB, because you never know when you're going to need money. All right. So the answer is that we will have less cash in the future. I think that people should have the option to use cash, particularly the elderly or those who are not digitally inclined. But do not pine or weep for cash. Remember, China serves as an example of this. The crime statistics, once China went cashless, went down tremendously. People don't carry cash, which means there's no reason to rob you. Stores don't have cash in them, so there's no reason to take a gun and rob your local shop because they can't give you any. So cash has some properties, including theft and as an instigator for crime, that are not at all laudable. So I look forward to days when we have a lot less cash. And yes, I believe it's necessary to have for a while longer, but don't pine nostalgic that cash is some sort of wonderful thing because people have died for it. And something, nobody dies for a digital WeChat Pay account or CBDC account.
Yes,
so
my dad for my latest iPhone, but that's a different story now.
That's a different story. The latest iPhone, yes, I'm sorry
which
to
is
say
my
that's
bank
true.
account. So, Richard, thank you very much for the conversation. Where can we all follow your work and contribute to your public discussions?
Sure. If you are interested in this topic, I cover it daily and weekly on my newsletter, which is called Cashless. And
I
it's
subscribed
about
already.
You subscribe. Thank you, Paolo. And it's on Substack. So just Google search Substack, Cashless, Turrin, Turrin. And it's all about fintech, CBDC, and AI, all at the speed of Asia, because watch Asia even for other technological innovations like AI, which I'm sorry we don't have time to talk about, but watch, because Asia, while perhaps not the world leader in AI models, is, however, the world leader in implementing AI and putting it to use. And that's going to be an interesting thing to watch.
I just came back from Korea, where I opened the Korea Fintech Week, and it's always interesting to see the type of development that is taking shape in Asia Pacific overall. Now, Richard, grazie mille for your contribution to the Banker's Bookshelf. All the friends that are listening to us, stay tuned for more, because more episodes and research discussions are coming. It is clear by now that the Banker's Bookshelf is an incredible opportunity to make a journey all together, learning about the future of banking and fintech. We discuss with authors like Richard Turrin on the most interesting books and studies that are finding a prominent space in the library of curious bankers and fintech entrepreneurs. Arrivederci and enjoy the Banker's Bookshelf jingle.